Started from the bottom, kept on climbing, perfect timing, looking down from the top. I don't see no opposition from my position. I'm focused. It's a must, I complete the mission. I won't stop, I can't stop. The grind is all I know. I'm focused, I can't stop. The hustle's all I know. I'm hungry, ambitious. My heart is on go. You in the presence of greatness. That's all you need to know.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Identity Jedi Show. You know, we got another banger of an episode for you today. But before we get to our interview, which it is a dope interview, by the way. If you've ever been worried about, or wondered about, not worried about, why would you be worried about it? But if you've ever wondered about identity standards, what are the identity standards? What does it take to be on an identity standards body? Then this is the episode for you. You want to check out the interview because I got some of the best people I know that do this day in and day out. Got them all together on the pod, and we talked about that thing. Identity standards. What does it take? What does it take to be on a standards body? I can tell you right now, people, your boy, your man, your guy, I'm not it. Can't do it. Identity standards aren't for me. I've tried twice in my life, but it takes a lot of, we shall say, patience. I don't really have a lot of that, especially for the identity standards, but I do have interest. And I'm still trying to join and learn. I want to see how these things come together because standards are important. So we get to that today in the interview. But before we do that, listen, you guys know what it is. You got to like, rate, subscribe, whatever platform you're watching this on. Make sure you're locked into the Identity Jedi newsletter coming to your inbox every 2 weeks on Wednesdays. We drop new blogs on Mondays. Sometimes we even throw in some Fridays there. Don't forget for our premium users. I know I owe you guys. It's been a while since I got a premium newsletter, but I got some stuff. Listen, when I tell you, I got some good stuff for my premium users. I'm going to be dropping some stuff for you guys as well. Listen, for my premium users, real quick shout out. Listen, did you know we're now on Twitch? Holla at your boy. We do a behind the scenes on Twitch live. We just take you behind the scenes of all the stuff that we're doing. I want my premium users. We got some special content that's going to be dropping specifically for you. So make sure you tap into that. And then, of course, make sure you're tapped into the Identity Jedi podcast, which you guys are already on. So, listen, before we get to the interview, there's been a lot of talk about AI. I mean, especially within identity. Vendors, they're all saying they can do it. They're going to throw this. There's AI companies coming in. I've said on another podcast, I will not be surprised if identity or AI security posture management becomes a thing, like a very real thing. People are probably saying they already do it now. But what caught my eye a couple of weeks ago was Okta put out a press release talking about Auth for Gen AI. And I was intrigued, to say the least. I wanted to know what they were doing and how they were approaching this. And there's a lot of fluff they put in their PR, but there are some things, and this is coming from the Auth 0 branch of Okta because they still are kind of two separate entities, even though they're one. And that's been a while now, but we won't get into that. But they released this information talking about how they want to help in the fight to securing AIs. And listen, this is going to be a real thing because as AI usage and expansion has grown rapidly, we are seeing organizations struggle with how to get a grasp of using AI. People are just going out and using it. It is in that instance just like SaaS, but in this case, the AIs are changing and the access to data that they have is moving so quickly that it's really making CISOs and even CIOs really hesitant to figure out how do they wrap their brain around this. And just even so recently, we saw Samsung roll back their policy saying, listen, we don't want our people using AI because somebody had uploaded some sensitive data into the AI chat and they didn't want that being used for their LLMs for training models. And so there's all kind of things around AI that corporations have to understand and look at. But guys, we can't run away from this because it is here. I mean, people use it every day. I use it all the time. Me and ChatGPT, man, we like this. My morning walks, turn on interactive voice mode. We be talking it up, chatting. Because that's, Chat GPT. Okay, that was kind of a dad joke. But anyway, my point being, it is something that is here to stay, and it is something that we definitely have to get our hands around. So with that, I figured, man, let's dive into what exactly Auth 0 is all about. And that's what we're going to do. So here we go. Right? Let me make this a little bit bigger for you guys. Auth 0 for Gen AI applications. Matter of fact, let me move down to bottom left. Nah, like bottom right. There we go. So I'm not in your guys' way. For those of you that are listening, don't worry about that. You just get to hear my lovely voice as I walk you through auth0.com/AI, where they're talking all about their Auth for Gen AI and what they're doing. And so when I heard about this, I was excited. I thought it was a different product offering that they were going to be rolling out. And it's not. It really seems to be more of a collection of the tools that they already had in the Auth0 development kit that you could use for putting some authentication and authorization around Gen AI projects. And so, in true Auth0 fashion, this is meant for developers, right? If you guys don't know about Auth0 before they were bought by Okta, this was your favorite developer's tool. Like, this is what they use for authentication. They created really easy to use SDKs to make launching authentication in your app super, super easy. You didn't have to worry about doing so much of that heavy lifting. They provided it for you. But they didn't just stop with authentication. They had authorization libraries. And so for those devs, this was really the thing. And so in that fashion, they kept with that, which is what I think they should do. I mean, that's what they're known for. Stick to what you're best at. But with looking at this, they really broke it down to four components. Obviously, user authentication, right? So they walk you through some setups of how, they got a quick start documentation set up where you can walk through how you do user authentication using Auth0. Nothing really super special here. You're just going in and setting up Auth0 to be your main authentication. If you're using a Next.js app, which I absolutely love Next.js, it's what I always code in, then yes, I still code. I hear you snickering. Then, you just kind of set this up as a middleware function. You pass the authentication to Auth0. You get a helper function to go and get your session. I'm not going to walk you guys all through that. That's actually not really the fun part. Next is the token vault. Again, this is some things that they make easier for getting these tokens and having it managing the tokens for you. A library, it seems like that Auth0 already had. I'm going to move here to this async authorization. I thought of all of this was the most interesting, right? So being able to set up this flow where your AI agent can go out and do what you are trained, you've asked it to do. Hopefully you've given it some guardrails, but when it needs to go interact with something, it needs to come and get that authorization. And so this should be like a human in the loop kind of approval for that authorization. So this agentic AI agent isn't just going off and doing things, it's doing them, but with a human's approval, right? So I'm going to go down here to kind of where you kind of set up the flow. And it's using the SIBA flow for setting it up. Client-initiated back-channel authentication flow, or SIBA. We'll break what that down is in another session. Premium users, I might break that down for you. But what I really like about this, and I won't get into a lot of the code on this, but is this flow right here, which I thought was crucial for them to put out there. So basically you have your AI agent request authorization to do, in this case, they have a stock app. Why is it always a stock app? We are so interested in that when we do these kind of fake apps. So it's always, or these quick start apps, it's always a stock app. I just find that interesting. So you have your AI agent, it goes to request authorization. It's going to come to the authorization server. And at that point, when it comes to the authorization server, it's like, I'm getting ready to go do this action. I send a notification to the user. User gets some kind of prompt notification. It says, hey, AI agent's trying to do this. Do you accept this? Do you authorize this action? Say yes. Approve or deny the request. Comes back to the authorization server. That then comes back to the AI agent. There you go, right? I like that they laid this out so it kind of simplifies the flow. But one of the things when you think about this from, I would say, a user and use case standpoint is the whole thing about with your AI agents, you want them kind of autonomously doing their thing. So if every time they want to go do something, it's sending a notification, like I can just see some notification fatigue on that, or I can just see a better user experience of like, hey, I want you to go do these things. You have authorization for whatever, a day, 2 days, whatever. We've been down this path before of this kind of flow. Like, hey, when I need something, have a user prompt, give me authentication. For those of you, we're probably a little bit of gray or soon to get gray. If we remember, I want to say Windows Vista with the user account controls, where basically Windows would prompt you for everything, that any action you want to take on your computer. And we thought, hey, we're being secure. We're making sure that every action is authorized. That's great. Here's the bad thing. Users absolutely hated that. Nobody wanted to be prompted that many times for things. It's like, just do it. I don't want you to ask me 50 million times. Again, this is like, for any of you who have had a toddler from 2 to 3 when they go through that stage and it's like, why everything? And they're asking you 1,000 questions every 5 minutes. Like, that's not a sustainable flow, right? That's gonna cause fatigue and somebody to go like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to deal with this. I'm gonna find a different way to do it. So we're back to that same dilemma. We want to have authorization. We want to make sure we understand what's going on with the AI agent, but I don't think human in the loop for everything is quite the way to go about it. There's got to be some kind of middle ground there where it's human in the loop and it's like for, just in time or dynamic or a just in time and just in moment or for a moment type of access. Here's what I mean by that. So, hey, when you need to go do something, AI agent, let me know what it is that you're going to do. And I will give you authorization for a selection of criteria that I want you to do for a specific amount of time. In other words, hey, for the next day, you have access to go buy trades, sell trades, or do these or whatever. And then be able to give it some criteria. You can, like in this case, a stock app, you can buy anything and place an order under $1,000. You have that authorization for the next day. We've got to move to some more richer authorization context. So we're not constantly badgering the user, but we are asking them to give authorization when it meets certain thresholds. I think that type of model would work better. But listen, excited to see Auth0 doing something like this. I started looking through some of the example codes. I think this would be a fun project to kind of do over a weekend and build some stuff up and see how it works. So for those of you who like coding as well, like I do, try it out. Head over to auth0.com/AI and check it out and see what you think. So there we go. That's what I got for you on the open. So with that, listen, let's get you right to this interview. Like I'm telling you, we're going to be talking all about standards. It is a great pod. Some of the smartest and coolest people that I've met in this industry, Mike Kaiser and I go back a long way. In fact, put this on record, on wax right now. That's how y'all know I'm aging myself on wax. Listen, me and Mike Kaiser, when it comes to identity and podcasts, we are the originators. We are the OGs. I will go on record and say we had the first identity podcast, the Mistaken Identity podcast, back when him and I are at Cell Point. We got him on the interview. We got Dean Sachs over at Beyond Identity, long time identity veteran and on standards. Mr. Paul Lanzi, who's worked on standards. He's a big advocate of SCIM, System for Cross-Domain Identity Management. Had him on the pod as well. So get all these guys together talking about standards. I mean, what could be better than that? Exactly. So let's get you over to the pod. Let's get you over to the interview. Come back for me afterwards. We'll talk a little bit more about what we're seeing, some things with identity and AI. I'll see you after the break. All right, everybody, welcome to the Identity Jedi Show. We've got a panel of guests today for a themed episode that may not follow the theme given the cast of characters that I somehow decided was a good idea to put all together on one podcast. And I regret that immediately as they all came on. But they're all very good friends of mine. Hey, if anything, you're just going to get some funny jokes and we're going to tell some stories about Berlin and Munich and Identity Beer and who else knows. But what we're supposed to talk about is standards. So I've themed the standards episode. We're going to dig into identity standards and what they've meant throughout the identity industry, how they come about. Do they just spontaneously arrive one day? What it takes to sit on standards boards and get them approved, and where we see standards going in the future. Now, that's what we're supposed to talk about today. Will we talk about that? Who knows?
No.
We'll see. We'll get to it. And with that, welcome to the Identity Jedi Show. I am not going to introduce my esteemed guests. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. One of us, and you can pick which one, needs no introduction because he's just known as the guy with the hat. I'll let you figure out which one that is. But yeah, he's looking around. I don't know why he's looking around. He's the only one that wears a hat. But we got a superstar lineup for you to dive into this topic. So first off, let's start with Dean. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the folks.
Oh, sure. Thanks, David. So I'm Dean Sachs. I'm principal engineer at Beyond Identity, and I have been in the security realm for it's 25 years this year, I think, and doing identity for 15-ish, but mostly in the last 10, and do a lot of standards work. So I operate through the IETF, OpenID Foundation. I co-chair the Interoperability Profiles for Secure Identity in the Enterprise, aka IPSI working group. It's a mouthful. I also co-chair the Death in the Digital Estate community group over at the OpenID Foundation, and I co-chair the FIDO Alliance's Enterprise Deployment Working Group. So been doing standards for 8-ish years now and have lots of war stories and lots of fun to talk about, but I'm sure we'll get there eventually.
All right, awesome. Paul, you're up next.
All right, great. My name is Paul Lanzi. I am the principal consultant over at Identivate, and we are an identity consulting firm helping out Fortune 100 companies and Series A startups in the identity space to adapt to the new technologies in the identity world. Previously, I was the founder and COO at a company called Remediant, which was focused on privileged access management for large enterprises, where I had an opportunity to work on a number of different standards. So that's actually where I got my start, working on identity standards. Got to work on a couple of 1800 series documents, as well as learning to help out with SCIM. So that's been my primary focus. I was also the technical working group leader for a number of IDSA technical working groups during that time. Even further back in my history, mostly was IT project management, delivering many very terrible IT security solutions to those in the pharma industry. So for all of those folks affected by that, I apologize to this day for the many terrible solutions I deployed at Genentech and Roche and Gilead. Sorry. Yeah, and happy to be on and be part of this bag of cats you've invited on to talk about a very dry topic. Normally a very dry topic. I think this is going to be the spiciest take that you're ever going to have on identity standards.
All right, Mike, save the best for last, sir. The floor is all yours.
I don't think I've heard the phrase bag of cats used before, but I'm definitely stealing that. I'm Mike Kaiser, Director of Strategy and Standards at SailPoint, which means I should be doing standards, I guess, because it's in my title. I'm a big fan of standards for a long time because I'm, at least in theoretically, a fan of truth. I think we can talk about that later, whether that's really or not is a thing or not. I co-chair, by Dean's mistake, I co-chair the Death and Digital Estate stuff with him. Active in the SCIM working group, really busy with shared signals and those kinds of things. I just like things working. Done a lot of security architecture and stuff in my background. I think that what I really like doing is explaining standards to normal people. It's totally one of my jams.
Okay.
I will vouch that you are a much better friend at a cocktail party than that made you sound like, Mike.
I will second that, but I will say Mike does a very good job in bringing it down to the normies who don't sit in standards bodies all the time, like taking that content and making it accessible to somebody who doesn't sit in that space all the time.
Someone was talking the other day and I was like, yeah, we can get to what this needs to be, but we should have fun while we do that. So I get bored easy, so I like distracting with shiny objects also.
Oh, I would have never guessed.
I know, right?
So let's open up the conversation. Let's just start there. Why do we have standards? Why do they exist?
Because people want to interoperate.
Why do people want standards in identity? Let me be very, very clear before Mike goes off in a different direction. Because
sure, we want to interoperate. We want to be able to communicate effectively, and we want it to be simple. We want it to just work. And the reason, so I've been around a long time. I had my first web page in 93 when I was at Emory University as a grad student, and the reason the web took off, the reason the web works is because of standards. The reason we got to e-commerce on the web was because of standards. And standards are the thing that keep moving that entire platform, and not just the web, but mobile apps, et cetera, moving all of that forward and build better, richer interactions and more usable tools. But without standards, we don't have a way to say, hi, I'm Dean, and I'm not just another dog on the internet, to pull back to the 95 or so New York Times, or it was New York Times, whatever the image was from, the New Yorker, I believe. But identity is critically important to be an enabler, and standards are the underlying enabler for all of that on the web and all these other contexts we operate in.
I think in enterprises specifically, when it comes to identity in enterprises, LDAP is even older than I am, I think, and I'm pretty darn old. And so I think we have a number of well-established, even used today. I think this is one of those unique things about identity is that you look at compared, like Dean gave an example of like web browsers. HTML is adopted a ton as a standard, right? Compare today's HTML standard to like Netscape 0.9 beta, the version of HTML that was being used for that, massively different, right? And we've seen a number of proprietary technologies in the web space come and go, but HTML is stuck around. I think in identity, you could point to LDAP, and it largely is unchanged. in the better part of 20 years. And something like Skim, which is one of the ones I help out with, is also over the last decade or so has adapted slightly, but not changed a lot. We're trying to change that now. But I think that one of the unique things about identity is because it's so heavily used in enterprises that we tend to love our standards and stick with them for quite some time.
I mean, standards are around because people want to interoperate, agreed. And I think standards make that interoperation less of a pain in the arse, ultimately. Because otherwise, you could interop with everybody under the sun, but you'd have to go one by one-to-one relationships with everything. And so that's part of it. In an ideal world, standards exist because they make things easier and that's the right way to do stuff. But I think in the real world, standards exist and are used because people like money. And if I'm a startup, I want to attach myself to a standard and I want that standard to get really popular so that I can be the starter of that standard and have the product that really does that standard the best because I co-wrote it. If I'm not a startup, then different incentives exist. Maybe I want to kill it with fire because I was a previous startup, or I have a different technology, or maybe I have a cash cow that I don't want touched, or maybe there are lots of reasons why that could be promoted or not. I think they survive because ultimately they make sense, right? So.
I love that you mentioned killing it with fire, because I think that is a really an underappreciated thing in the standard space. Is that though we love to think it's all singing kumbaya and all moving forward together toward a singular direction, we recognize that there are competing standards and there are times at which people are going to try and slow or block things because they're not the way that they think it should be done. It may not be in their personal or corporate best interest to do things that way, or maybe it's just a terrible idea. And there are plenty of standards that are maybe started with good ideas that became terrible ideas. So I think we really need to embrace this idea that it's not always about progressing that standard forward. Sometimes it really is the right thing, depending on your perspective, to slow something down. Maybe it's not the right time, maybe it's not the right technology, maybe the technology itself is dangerous. But you've also got to be careful because you can't just always be a blocker, because that will tarnish your reputation and prevent you from doing anything and moving forward at all.
We weren't going to get very far in this conversation without mentioning Heather Flanagan and the amazing work that she does around identity standards. And she did a blog post the other day about killing things with fire or joining a standards body simply to stop it from progressing forward as a tactic. To Mike's point about that, some of those in our industry have taken as a tactic to slow the progress down because they're trying to protect a cash cow. They're trying to protect a proprietary interface. And it is heartening to me that very infrequently works in identity. I think there's other spaces, right? Even in security, where I think we've seen that happen. But I think identity has been largely resistant to that. And I'd be curious, actually, since both of you work for identity companies, I'm curious for your perspective on why that is the case. Like, what does it make? What's special about identity that lets us not be subject to that kind of slowdown?
Mike, I'm going to let you take that one first.
I'm not. You think you're asking why you think identity is different than other industries?
So Heather's blog article talked about that in potentially even in identity, right? But certainly in other industries, we've seen where an industry player will join a standards body simply to stop progress from going forward at all. And I think that in other parts of security, we've seen that be successful, and things that were really good ideas didn't progress very well or progressed in a strange direction, right? Because there was a large industry player joined and dominated the conversation. Right. And it feels like an identity we've largely been able to steer clear of that. Maybe there's some counter examples you can think of, but it seems like we've been able to move forward as a sub industry pretty well.
So now I want to know the examples from the other ones that designed and then nuked it. We can talk about that later. I think to answer your question, from my perspective, I'm relatively new to the creating standards part of the game. I think that a couple of things. Well, I mentioned companies joining or slowing down or stopping. That side of the house is, and this will come as a shock to no one, My days of my youth when I was involved in Model United Nations. Yes, of course I was. But to the point, though, what happened in that thing was your school, your entity represented some country, right? And so no one thought twice. Everyone realized, I better figure out what this country's about, what we have, what we don't have, what we like, what we don't like. And it was really fascinating, especially coming from an American perspective, a US perspective, to say, oh, I'm going to jettison that default, that idealism sometimes, right? And take on a different entity. What that also meant was there was power, right? You walked into a room, whatever part of the United Nations, I'll beat this to death here in a minute and we'll be done with this an illustration, but whatever group it was, you walked in the room, and if you were Uganda, sadly or not sadly, you had less power than, say, Japan, who had less power than another country, but you would look around and you would see who had the power in the room. Think of the Security Council of the United Nations. They have permanent seats with permanent vetoes, right? What that meant was there were power imbalances, and as soon as you walked in, you wanted to know which country someone was from, because that told you what their bias was, what their incentives were. Same thing with the standards body. It was shocking to me, but not shocking, that you walk in and say, oh, hey, and this person would be lovely, and they'd have this opinion. But who do you work for again? Oh, that company. That opinion now makes sense. It doesn't make it right or wrong necessarily. It just means I see why you're saying that. Because, and there've been a couple examples like that where I've run into. I'm like, that's an interesting opinion, and I can't really say that this is right or wrong, but you seem really passionate about it. And then I find out where they work. I'm like, oh, it's because you need this to happen. Otherwise, you don't have a job in 6 months. That's understandable, or whatever else it is, right? I think that layer is there, but there's also, I think, for the identity community and the identity standards community, having come in the past 2 or 3 years, I think people are unreasonably warm in general, unreasonably helpful. You ask questions, they'll answer them, right? I think
Yeah.
Victoria, Dean could say how Victoria, I think, took him under his wing and helped him out and showed him how to navigate some of this stuff. As an example, he can tell that maybe later. But I think the people themselves, you might say some things or discuss some things, but then on the side, you'd be like, yeah, I think you're right. I can't support you in this, but I think what you're doing is right. You'll have those conversations outside of the formal voting sphere. So I think part of your answer, Paul, is that things progress because there's a fairly strong identity standards community, at least within some of the organizations I've been involved in. I'm not sure it's universal across identity, but I think that 2-tiering makes some sense, where you have, yes, incentives, always important to remember, but also there's this collegial working to something that's right or true.
I, I think you nailed it, Mike. What I would say is, excuse me, in you will see Tim Capelli and I argue like cats and dogs in public. You will also see Tim and I go out and grab a beer or grab dinner because we're friends. We can argue about some of the technical aspects of the things that we are both passionate about. We can argue about what is right and wrong. And I may not always win. Tim may not always win. Neither of us may win. Somebody else may win. But we can have the technical argument, and then we can walk away and go be friends, because we're all trying to do what we believe is the best thing possible. And part of that means that you're negotiating. You're not going to get 100% of everything that you want every single time you want it. And so you've got to figure out how to navigate through this this endless sort of space where I know that I'm going to need something from somebody later. And so I need to figure out how to make sure that even when we disagree, we can still be on good terms otherwise, so that we can work together on the next thing that we're going to work together on.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it, but also you have to look at the dynamics of different kinds of standards organizations, right? So you have an organization like IETF, which is completely open, and all of the mailing lists are open and the meetings are open. Anyone can join, anyone can take part. You have some light obligations, but it's really open. You look at something like the FIDO Alliance is much more closed. It's more of a, you have to pay to gain access to the meetings, to gain access to the internal discussions and debate, etc. And then you have OpenID Foundation, which sits somewhere in the middle, much closer to IETF, but you do have to sign a contribution agreement. So it's a minimal bar to entry. If you want to become a member on a personal level, it's it's very inexpensive. Those different framings of how they're put together change how the standards sausage is made, because you have people that can be very heavily invested in a standards body because their business is heavily dependent upon that particular standard or set of standards from that body. And how that happens in a closed environment versus an open environment is going to be very different. And it's where you start to see some of the internal dynamic, or the internal dynamics of the companies that are working with each other come out in some of these spaces, but you don't necessarily hear that come out into the public view, because what happens in those closed spaces generally stays in those closed spaces. It's a weird world. I love it, but it's a weird world, and I'm lucky to be able to take part in it and see all the strange things that happen.
I
Did
think that
you just
both
basically compare standards organizations to Fight Club? I just want to.
Maybe.
I
Maybe.
knew that's where he was going. Jesus, I've
Well,
been around this guy.
I
way
wasn't
too-
going there because I am not the movie watcher here. We've already
No, no, no.
established that.
I knew you weren't going there, Dean. I knew for 1,000% that's where Michael's going.
Yeah, Mike.
Always.
I think you both hit on something which is interesting, which is the number of companies involved in these conversations, which is a bit different, I think, identity. So I think by my terrible math, between the four of us, I think we've been working at 6 different identity companies in the last 10 years. And so there's just a lot of companies in identity that all have touch points into different identity standards and all have a vested interest, which means that if company A isn't going to play ball, that's okay, because there are still companies B, C, D, E, and F that have a vested interest in seeing that standard move forward, as compared to maybe another security sector like EDR, where there's 3 big players. You've got SentinelOne, you've got CrowdStrike, and you got Microsoft. And if one of them isn't going to play ball, then it's like game over for the standards evolution in that space. And so I think one of the things that's different about identity is just the sheer number of identity companies. Now, this is also very befuddling for security buyers, right? CISOs and identity teams are trying to navigate this space and understand how all of these things fit together. But part of the answer is that us on the identity provider side have had to work together to create standards to make them interoperable so that the buyer can actually make sense of the space and knit together a set of identity technologies that actually does the thing that they need it to do.
So, like, in a very meta way, if you think about it, like we created the very ecosystem that birthed the need for standards, and therefore this need to work together. Because if you look at the identity industry, right? So back when Oracle decided to buy Sun, and basically, for lack of a better terms, killed the identity market, right? As a single platform thing. It oh man, I'm gonna nerd out so hard.
Wave set for life, man. What are you talking about?
But no, so everybody went to their corners, right? So SSO, and then IGA, and then PAM, and then whatever you want to call it, or you can even break it down outside that. But so since everybody went to their corner, we went best of breed. Customers had no choices. Some of these things have to integrate, because I'm still trying to solve a singular problem, but now I've got 5 different things that all handle it. And so we created the very universe for us to go. We're gonna have to create standards if this is gonna work, because we're gonna have to we're gonna have to interoperate with each other, because I don't want to do that. I'm just gonna be a PAM vendor. I'm just gonna be an IDP. I'm just gonna be this. And so now it's very interesting, and this kind of brings me to my second question about it is, as we're starting to see that shift and come back, and now we've seen a lot of consolidation.
Say the word. Say the word. Come on. Say the word. Convergence.
I wasn't going to say it, but thanks
I
for
know.
saying it for me.
Right.
Now that we're seeing this convergence within identity to extended, we're coming back to create these bigger platforms. Where do you guys see that playing out in both like the needs for standards, and how do you think that will change the standards bodies?
I think there's, I'll say this as someone without a horse in this specific convergence race, is that, other than from the buyers, advising buyers on how to navigate this space, I think there's a real risk, right? So we could see a risk of what's happened. Again, not to keep dumping on EDR, but like it's an easy to understand example where there are 3 big players, and if they're not going to go do something, it's not going to get done. I think the risk exists that if we ended up in a similar situation in the identity world, where we had 2 or 3 or 4 large converged IAM platforms, that it would really slow down the motivation to create interoperable standards between them. Because, like you said, within their little silo, they've got the IGA and the PAM, and they cover all the NHI, and they cover all the use cases. That said, I don't think that's a very likely reality. I think despite all of the shrieking about convergence we've heard from the market, that best of breed in identity space is just too important to completely mean that we'll end up with completely converged solutions for most buyers.
Let me challenge that a little bit, Paul. I don't disagree with you on the large vendor convergence side, and that is potentially a risk. However, there's a robust market of applications and services, SaaS apps, that sit out there that need to consume identity from some convergence happen at some point. All of these services are sitting out there, and they need things like federated authentication. You're looking at SAML, you're looking at OpenID Connect. This is where IPSI is trying to play a role now, and hopefully we'll come back to that a little bit later. So I think it may change the dynamics a little bit, but there are still going to be these downstream needs that are not part of these large converged vendors that need to be serviced. And in that space, standards continue to allow that to happen. And this is, I hope, where we'll see the rise of more things like the shared signals framework, the work that Mike has been doing in SCIM events, which is using the SSF framework, the shared signals framework, to move SCIM events back and forth. It's probably going to be a mixed bag if we do hit that sort of 5 large vendors, 3 large vendors convergence. I think we'll still see work happening, but it might happen in some different spaces.
I think at the edges, you're right. I think that where those silos touch external service providers, 100%, like that evolution would need to continue there. But within those silos, could a new best of breed solution learn how to fit in and integrate with those silos? I think that they'll become, by just definition, more closed and less likely to work on open standards.
The distributed nature of things, I think, lends itself, I don't know why I said like our times, but lends itself to using standards in ways that we didn't have to before. Now, what's interesting about the merger thing is that I think you're going to start seeing mergers be easier because of standards usage. What do I mean by that? Integration points. If I've got microservices and everything is event streaming between offerings, if I slap 2 of those together, my architecture doesn't really have to change a whole ton immediately because I'm just throwing events around if I've done my job on both sides. Large if. But that's an interesting case, right? I know some organizations that are already deploying standards on their own internally, not between vendor components, just between components, because they're like, this is a good idea. And I think that kind of stuff helps, right? I don't know.
Yeah, limiting that internal custom dev work and then the burden of having to keep that up to date over time is a huge benefit to companies, especially both small companies and big companies. But as you grow, that large code base of all the custom things that I did when I was small and agile now becomes a burden that you have to manage, and it's hard. So being able to standardize and use standard tools is a massive benefit internally to your organization.
Yeah, I either will have recently given or I am giving a talk on tech debt in large enterprises for identity systems. And that's one of the points I make, Dean, is that these custom integrations, this custom coding, the thing that you had an intern spend 2 weeks on 6 years ago, will come back to bite you if it's a proprietary to proprietary connection. But if it's an open standard, much less likely to cause you pain and suffering.
It'll still bite you. It just won't hurt as much.
But you'll have 10 vendors that you can choose from to help solve the bite.
Or 3. I mean,
depends on how much convergence we have.
It also depends on what you've done, right? If you had an intern do it, okay, you made your own problem, right? But if you designed your own ecosystem around not using standards, I think that might be a viable option also. Only because if I don't use standards, I can do exactly what I want, how I want, and possibly deliver a better result for my end user if my use cases are limited enough and I don't need outside help.
I guess that's true if the things you're connecting together never change. So if you're hoping that they just stay exactly, the proprietary APIs stay frozen in time, then sure. But that hasn't been my experience, I guess, Mike, and because those APIs do tend to change over time. as the proprietary vendors update and adapt and change.
No, I hear you. I'm just saying there are certain companies, organizations out there who I think have made a really good job of ignoring standards. And I actually favor one of them, I think. And I use a lot of their offerings, a lot of their stuff, and it's pretty great experience
I use a lot of
because they're
their
ignoring.
offerings too, because now that I know who you're talking about. But yeah, I'm just not going to go there today. They're just
Yeah.
there are reasons why I want the companies I do business with to follow standards, because it makes everybody's life better, hopefully. Not always, but hopefully. And there are organizations that choose to implement standards and do so a little differently than everyone else, or to nudge a standard in a direction that makes it more friendly to their particular business cases, which, okay, fair. It's what we're all trying to do here. We're all trying to navigate to that right space. But when you have a very large influence and do that, you can actually create situations that are potentially more dangerous for the user base or for implementers who don't understand it works this way, except in these 12 cases for this one vendor. And I'll just say with the Passkey ecosystem, I think that is one of the areas, and I'm not going to pick on a vendor here, but that is an area where the Passkey ecosystem has really created significant challenges. I spoke to a very smart member of the Identirati. Everybody knows this person within this realm. And they said to me, I just don't fucking understand where these passkeys are stored. I don't understand what's happening. And when I get my next device, I'm going to have to do account recovery on everything because I just don't get it. And if really intelligent, thoughtful people in our community are missing the mark on this, then I wonder how it's landing with the average human at the end of the line who needs to now deal with these technology choices that in some cases they're making on their own as individuals, but in many cases now they're being pushed into some of these ecosystems, probably for good reason, but not without complexity.
I'll say, as someone who's recently have helped 2 enterprises go through device-bound passkey rollouts at significant scale, Fortune 100 company scale, the ecosystem is messed up, man. Like, we're not in good shape for certain the consumer adoption of passkeys. I think some of the things you're talking about have left us in a situation where we're not well positioned to make that a good user experience, and the standards themselves are to blame for part of that.
I look forward to following up with you after this because from my role in the FIDO Alliance, I have some questions. I got to talk to you. I got to have an offline conversation so I can understand a little bit more, because this is part of what the Enterprise Deployment Working Group is trying to do, is to try and fix that, promote this in the enterprise and fix those challenges. But we got to hear the challenges to understand how to fix them too. Expect to reach out.
Real talk, real standards development here on the Identity Jam.
This is the way that it happens, though, right?
It's happening, people. Yeah, no, it's funny because Passkeys is one of my gold standards for getting major vendors to adopt, and then it takes off, right? Like, it does have issues, but what a massive success. What a massive success. An easy problem. No, not easy problem. An easily identifiable problem that no one saw the announcement that Passkeys had Microsoft, Google, and Apple. I'm like, there's the ball game for that one, right? If you don't embrace passkeys, you are now hosed. And so that's a really fascinating tipping point discussion to be like, when does the standard become viable? When does it not?
Because the number of different things that have to align to get a device-bound passkey to go from existing to actually authenticating you requires the browser, the operating system, in some cases the hardware token, sometimes a mobile device. They all have to work together in a compliant way, and that turns out to be tricky. Like,
sometimes you need MDM as well, right?
Right.
Because all of these play together, or sometimes you need a third-party passkey provider because the first-party passkey providers of the major platforms don't provide the functionality that you as an enterprise need. And so, yeah, it is an incredibly complex space, and it's an interesting one to watch, an interesting one to play in. But yeah, the complexity in the enterprise space there is very real.
I think the problem isn't so much of the standards alignment; it's the usability. Like it's the UX vision for how this standard will be represented at each layer. That's where the things haven't lined up, and the standards are largely silent about the use of what's the UX for this thing. And so I think that I'm not sure the standard should be more opinionated about the UX for it, but I think that disconnect has led to the challenges that you're describing, Dean.
Yeah, definitely. David, sorry, it's your podcast.
No.
We want you to have a chance to speak too.
Oh, it's David's podcast. I forgot.
It's everybody's podcast. It's for the people. It's for the people.
It's yes to the people. Yeah.
Oh, so Mike, you actually brought up a perfect segue that I wanted to get into is about like from standards body and working on it to adoption. What's that like? How much involvement does the body that comes together to create the standard have in that? And what have you guys seen is factors of success of whether or not a standard gets adopted?
I think it's complicated. I don't see any particular like magic key. In my mind,
Got a magic UV key here, but that may not be what you're talking about.
Oh my goodness. I walked into the SCIM working group and there was a major discussion going on between SCIM events and cursor-based pagination. All right. I walked in and I'm like, that little meme with the dudes with pizza and the fire in the room is like that. When I walk in, I'm like, what is going on? Because people are very passionate, especially one person was very passionate about their viewpoint. And the kind of thing where it's not either or in my mind. I think both of those things can exist depending on your use case. And so getting one of them, some people saw it as either or, so adoption was very difficult in that case. And so to resolve it, it took lobbying kind of one-on-one, almost like a political caucus discussion saying, I see your viewpoint. And I think really what it comes down to is figuring out, in my mind, what the code developers or either the people or the companies they work for, what their incentives are, and pitching your argument in a way that they can hear and take back to their management and say, we should do this because it will benefit us in these ways and make us money in this way. That's why I was saying a lot of times they're financially driven. You can't always do that, but I think that really helps. Otherwise, I'm like, why am I going to waste my development time supporting the standard when I could make a new feature that's going to make me more money than doing this piece of crap?
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm cited as a contributor to this SCIM cursor-based pagination standards. So thanks for bringing that one up, Mike. I don't know.
And we're going to get both in the end.
We will.
Right?
We are.
Spoiler alert, it is both. Right?
Yeah, and thank goodness. Yeah. And I don't know if all the standards bodies work like this, but IETF, like one of the check gates is, are the implementers actually implementing this? That's a thing that has to be, people have to say yes to that affirmative yes before that turns into a standard. And I think that's a really important step. And so when you see very large vendors saying, yes, we're implementing this, we already have it implemented, and it's already in testing or whatever, I think that's a huge signal to other implementers that, like, hey, you better get on board and support this. I think the other thing that forces this is lack of backwards compatibility. And thankfully in identity, we don't have a ton of that, but that's another thing that can drive adoption of a more secure standard or improved standard or whatever, is if you're like, you make a decision that version 3 is not going to be backwards compatible with version 2, that does to some degree force the issue. And that can compel buyers to say, I'm only going to buy solutions if it supports the version 3, because I know the version 2 thing is out the door.
Did I just hear you say you're writing SCIM v3.0? Because
no,
I hadn't heard. Okay, good.
No.
No, but I do think actually, Mike, I probably walked into that same room with you. I think it was probably at IETF in London. And that was, I was on the team at Amazon at the time that was working on a lot of the cursor-based pagination stuff, along with it was Danny and Paul and
Anjali.
Anjali from AWS, and then there was the original proposer, Matt Peterson, I want to say.
Yeah.
And I came into my first IETF meeting, like sitting there in person in the room with Anjali, and were talking a bit about this cursor-based pagination, there was people who thought it was an anathema because it wasn't the events spec. But what I learned out of that was I spent some time helping out on the event spec, even though it wasn't the thing that I necessarily wanted. It wasn't the thing that I saw as valuable to me at this very moment. It was valuable to others. And so I offered some help, I offered some feedback, I read through it, I offered some PRs, because it was a way to smooth over the relationship and make sure that everybody was getting a bit of what they need, so that I could get some help with the cursor-based pagination work that we thought was important for the things that we were trying to deliver. And that helps move the work forward. It's like you said, it's politics. It's model UN, except it's not a model and it's a real thing that happens. But you
No
need
less
to
nerdy. Right. Yeah.
oh no, way more nerdy than model UN.
So let's round out the thought on skim-based, cursor-based pagination for skim, right? So that's one where there's literally billions of transactions, literally billions of skim transactions every day, and where the original model design, the original spec designers 10 years ago thought that a pagination size of 10 was, or 100 was perfectly fine as a maximum, right? But now you're trying to synchronize literally billions of identities together. That's a lot of pages you've got to go through. And so cursor-based pagination actually lowers the compute cost, like by a significant margin, over the cost over these billions of transactions on a daily basis. And so, David, to your question, like what drives adoption? It's nothing like money. Like that's literally saving compute and network time in a significant way, like a significant way. For the hyperscalers, the Amazons of the world, like this is actual dollars that are being saved by adoption of the standard.
And for their customers too, right? Because their customers, one of the things that I saw, and the reasons why cursor-based pagination was important, is because without cursor-based pagination and index-based pagination in Skim, you could potentially lose or duplicate objects, because as things get inserted into the backing data store and you get this index-based page, now your index is shifted either up or down, and oops, I just missed something. And so you don't have a way to do anti-entropy. You don't have a way to ensure that your systems are truly in sync at all times, and not the boy band synchronized between the identities here. Sorry, Mike, I had to. I know it's your favorite. But this is actually a real problem. And in fact, even with the forthcoming work on cursor-based pagination, which has been in progress for a couple of years, we still lack the ability to do what's called a delta query to understand what has changed since the last time I asked you what has changed, so that I can say, out of this set of billion identities, these 300 have changed, and I only need to go rationalize the differences between those 300 without having to scroll through all billion identities to get that delta. And that's really the next thing that we've got to get moving.
What happens? So go ahead.
I was just gonna say, is that a man? I'm gonna completely butcher this reference, but I read it somewhere where it was like, there's really only two true hard problems in computer science. One was like trying to figure out cache, right? And I'm messing it up. There's something about basically caching. Basically, Dean, to your just point, like trying to figure out what has changed is like one of the real true hardest problems in computer science. And so it makes me think about, is that a standards job to fix that problem, or is that more like implementation?
It's the standards job to define the format to talk about the problem. Not to fix the problem, but to say, look, you have this problem, you're talking to this other system, here's how you want to use this language so we can speak a common language so we both know what the problem actually is, then y'all can figure it out. You can productize it. We're just giving you the common language. The Delta thing is an interesting example, because there are vendors out there who, without a standard for Delta, have built in Delta-based stuff. And you have that sometimes. So another aspect of your adoption stuff is not breaking someone who's come before. So the Delta-based skim stuff, for instance, there are a couple vendors out there that have Delta already in production. And the way that we've phrased it so far is so that you can do it the right way, but the way that was already coded isn't necessarily wrong, but we had to make sure the language didn't say this is wrong. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So you broaden the language a little bit so that you leave room for people to still live and exist and not come at you with pitchforks, which is good political savvy. The same thing I would argue that happens like with shared signals, right? Who in their right mind in a standards world, in a normal world, would say, hey, I'm going to send you an event. When I send you that event, you better take these 3 actions or you're not compliant with the standard. Nobody. That's a very hard thing to pull off, to say, well, you sign up to the standard that will make this other vendor have control over you doing things. So for the shared signals stuff, I like, and I wasn't there for the original thing when I walked in the door, this already in case, that it's what they call descriptive, not prescriptive. In other words, you say the signal says, I did this, FYI. You do you. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'm sharing information that I have with you so you can take informed action. We can all be informed actors. Now, in the real world, the org owner, the enterprise owner owns both products. And so who do you think should have the say as to what happens? That person, because they're paying everybody. So in reality, they work together, but keeping that out of the standard meant that it's a lot more viable and people are a lot more amenable to, oh yeah, I can see benefit without people telling me what to do.
But
When
I think
people feel like you're telling them what to do, then they don't tend to cooperate unless
you've also got to look at like the composability of standards, though, Mike. And this
how's
is
that?
one of the beauties of this world is that we can take a standard like shared signals, and we haven't done this yet, but there's an open GitHub issue in the IPSI repo about it. That can we take those informational events and under a certain profile say, if you are adopting this profile, you will treat these not just as events, but as triggers to take some downstream action. And so that discussion has been happening. It seems supportable. It seems like it's a likely outcome at some point for IPSI down the line, way down the line at this point. But just because the standard says this is how it works doesn't mean that you can't then tailor that and further narrow it with things like profiles. And you see this with FAPI for the high security APIs using OAuth. You see it with there's HART and all the other profiles that you see out there from OpenID Foundation, right? Those profiles simply take something that already exists and narrow that scope down or define more concretely how some things should work, because that's how it needs to work in a specific space. Not in every space, but in a specific space. And if you can agree to that, then again, you increase the quality of the outcomes for everybody engaged in that space, hopefully.
The technical side of things is often the easy part. The 2 thoughts. The best standards people, I think, are more former real world architects, because they're the ones that are like, I've done this before and that was a nightmare and this is not going to work because of these things. That's really helpful. But the technical side being easy, there's a whole different discussion. I don't know how much time we have, but there's a whole other discussion about adoption and marketing of standards and making something popular even before it's adopted. It could be good, could be bad. There's definitely some aspect of that. You have to promote it. And sometimes even if you promote it, if the standard's terrible, like New Coke, it's not going to work out. Just depends.
I
For an old
enjoyed New
reference.
Coke. I'm showing my age, but I enjoyed it.
You liked New? No one liked New Coke, Dean.
I did. I was a dumb kid. What do you want?
What about Crystal Pepsi? You like Crystal Pepsi too, didn't you?
Oh no, I grew up in Texas, which is I shouldn't have ever mentioned that, but no Pepsi.
I think Mike is just trying to tell us that he had a I Love Samuel shirt back in like 2001. He was ahead of Samuel's lot.
Listen, there's one of us not in this conversation, but his phone number ends in XACML.
Oh,
intentionally
man.
or just by faith?
No, intentionally.
Oh my goodness.
So many questions. Okay, listen. We're gonna wrap up with this one.
Sure we are.
I want each of you to imagine there's somebody listening or watching this podcast, and they're like, that is exactly what I want to do. I want to help write standards. This is what I want to do when I grow up. This is what I want to do right now. And so you have a 45-second trailer, each of you, to either convince them to do or not do. Like You can be the anti. You can be like, listen, this was a waste of 10 years of my life, and I would never agree for you to ever anybody to do this. Whatever you want to do. But you got 45 seconds to give your trailer on what it is to be a part of standards, either whether important or to be a part. Because somebody's looking at this and going, I think this is what I want to do. So, Mike, you get to lead us off.
Standards are about two things: truth and humanity, which means if you want to enjoy standards, you're going to have to be addicted to truth, of doing something because it's the right way to do it, because it's the best way to do it. You're also going to have to kind of like humans on some fundamental level, not only because the truth is helping humans, but you're going to have to deal with the hot mess that is humanity. Anything that combines those two, whether it's medicine or theology or politics, I think most people want to save the world, save humanity in some way. And I think standards is one of those ways to do it. It's about truth and about the hot mess that is humanity. I don't know if it's a sales job or not, but that's what I would probably explain it as.
I'd buy it.
Okay, Dean, Paul, you guys get to fight over who goes next.
Paul, go for it.
All right. So if someone came to me with this and as their vision, like this is the career they want to go into, the first piece of advice I would have for them is go get some actual real world experience working in enterprises first. Because I think that a lot of the challenges we've had with personalities or just even proposals, other things, these proposals haven't met haven't had hard contact with the real world yet. And I think that for me, the implementers, the standards proposers, those that work in standards bodies that I enjoy working with the most are the ones that have spent some time out in the wilderness, actually trying to implement enterprise systems for large enterprises. That would be my first piece of advice: is go out and get some real world, make some money first of all, but get some real world education out there first, because you'll be a much better standards contributor for having had that experience first. The second piece of advice I would give is it's really important to have strong opinions lightly held. Strong opinions lightly held. And I don't remember I didn't make up that quote. That's some famous person's quote, but I love it because I think that the best standards people I work with are those that have strong opinions lightly held.
I think you're wrong, Paul.
Perfect.
I'm going to hold it lightly.
I love that. I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Strong opinions loosely held is really good. It doesn't always work, but it's a good idea. So I think my advice would echo a lot of what Paul and Mike said, right? You've got to have some background. You've got to have some experience in the real world to understand how these problems manifest themselves. I wouldn't expect most people coming like straight out of college, for instance, to jump into this. I would want you to have some experience. But if you have that experience, if you like traveling to far off distant places in the tropics to sit in a dark, windowless, over the air-conditioned room to argue about technical minutia for hours and hours on end, and then go eat and hang out with your peers, then you're probably going to enjoy this space. But the thing that I think is really critical is being able to write and share your ideas with clarity. And one of the things that I really learned at Amazon during the 10 and a half years I spent there was how to write things down in a way that is clear, is concise, is unambiguous. That is such an important tool in doing standards work, is being able to write in that unambiguous manner. And so if you like these things and you are able to take the advice from Paul and Mike and then combine that with some good writing and critical thinking skills, apparently not speaking skills today. But if you can do that, I think you can be very successful. But the hardest thing you're going to run into is who funds your work. You've got to find a place that is invested in building standards because it impacts their business in some way. It impacts them financially, whether positively or negatively. It impacts them financially, and therefore they have an interest in funding the airfare, the hotels, the food, the conference fees, all of the things that go along with being in standards. It's not something that most people do independently because they just want to burn a bunch of money every year.
Just for funsies. They're not doing.
That sounds like my retirement plan, just for funsies, but I'm not quite there yet. So
We don't all have Jedi money, is what you're saying.
Dude,
No.
Jedi don't have Jedi money. I don't know what you're talking about, buddy. Don't
He
get
spent it
twisted.
all on May the 4th gear.
I know, and then it fell on a Sunday, which sucked. Although I am watching Star Wars all week, but that's not really any different than any other week.
Par for the course.
Par for the course. Listen, gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on. This was great. This was an awesome conversation. It went exactly how I thought it would. Mike would get us off topic in the beginning, which is great, and get some stories. But no, just a lot of good detail around this area. This is, for me, I've always found it fascinating. I don't have the temperament. I've realized that. I could never co-chair or chair a standards body. I have the temperament to help out and to problem solve, see different things, and give input where I can. But I'm just not a process person like that. And it just seems like a lot of process for me that I would just be like, I'm out, I'm done. But I do see the importance of it. I wanted to get this time to get you guys to come together. Plus, I love always talking to you guys, but just really kind of get that information out there of what the standards are. And I think as we move into this age of identity and with everything that's coming, as we get to sprawl and as we do more things and we're seeing this platform shift, I do think it's going to become more and more important. And it's going to power a lot of what we see of how to connect into this. Because one of the biggest fears that I have for the convergence, as Paul calls it, is that what's going to happen to technical alliances, right? So Paul, like you mentioned, and you kept picking on EDR, but it was great. If we converge too much, or even if during this convergence, when that happens, people tend to get behind their own shields and their own moats and go, we're just going to do this. And now it doesn't behoove us to work with this other person anymore because they're competing on us. Like who's left in the middle is the customer, stuck trying to figure this out and going, I need these two things to talk to each other, but they don't want to talk to each other because now they compete and I don't give a shit. How do I fix my problem? And so I think standards and what we develop with that, especially around data and these, I got to say it because we can't have a podcast in 2025 without saying AI. But as you start to build a lot of these things, this is all based on how you look at and consume data. And if you're going to consume data and you're going to make actions or take decisions based off of data, then you're going to share that data. So if I'm going to consume a piece of data and then make an action based off of that and I want to share it, I'm going to have some standard to go, okay, here's the data that I found. Let me go give it over to Mike. And then Mike goes, oh, great. I'm going to do this with it. I'm going to pass it over to Dean. There's got to be some way to talk and do that. Otherwise, it's just going to be one big mess, which we've done before. And then there'll be another 20 years and the next generation behind us will just make all their money fixing the messes that we made. Who knows? Listen.
And we're setting up the kids for success.
Exactly. That's what it's all about. Okay.
Well, Wendy's keynote,
fondly, kids. Yeah.
Wendy Nather's keynote at B-Sides talked about the existence of the $20 billion information security business as simply existing to fill all the cracks in the underlying applications that couldn't be bothered to fix their security problems to begin with. Now we're at the part of the industry where we're layering security on top of the $20 billion security industry because our security products have security problems that also need fixing. But to answer your question, David, so SCIM entitlements, like coming in the future, hopefully. But the idea is that in the future, by adding those to SCIM, that we will be able to provide data level entitlement, or at least some level of entitlement management in a standard way that doesn't exist today. And it's something I feel pretty passionately that should exist.
Okay. All right. And listen, if you guys take nothing else from this, I'm going to screw it up. Strong opinions, lightly held. There you go.
There you go.
It's the key to life, people. All right. So that's it. Then we're going to wrap. You guys know what it is. Thank you so much for joining. Don't forget to rate, subscribe, whatever podcast platform you are listening to this on, whatever platform you're watching this on, because we also do video as well. Leave a comment. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you like Mike's hat. He's got like 7,000 of them, and he carries them in their own suitcases whenever he travels. I'm not telling you how I know this. I'm just saying that I know this. We'll see you guys on the next show. All right, welcome back, man. What a great episode. Those are definitely some characters, but I had a lot of fun getting those guys together and talking about standards. And so I want to end with this, right? Real quick closing. Listen, like I said in the beginning, I may not be a big fan of standards and able to do it. Let me back that up. I'm a big fan of standards. I just don't have the capacity to stand on those standards boards, but it's definitely something that we need more people to get involved in. So if it's something as you are circling around the community and you've been wondering, where's the chance that I can really get active in the identity community and help make a difference, standards bodies are a great way to do it. But also it's a good thing to learn. If you just want to understand more about what's going on in the identity space, what things are coming out, how are some of your practitioners, your peers thinking about this, and how are they trying to solve some of these hard problems that we have? It's a great way to get involved, learn more, and get your name on a standards body, get your name in the standards committee. Go out there and give your perspective on some certain things. Maybe even jump in and take some meeting minutes. That's a great way to get involved as well. But definitely takes a temperament that your boy just does not have. But it is a very, very important thing. I would encourage anybody that's listening to this, if you're interested, go ahead and jump in on one. That's it for this week of the Identity Jedi Show. Appreciate you guys so much for joining in. You guys know what it is. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, whatever platform you're listening to this on. For my Spotify users, drop us some love, give us a comment. Keep checking out the Spotify video, YouTube, drop a comment. All the stuff is in the description notes. I'll drop the links to everybody's profiles in there. You can catch up with some of these crazy characters whenever you want to. Until the next time, you guys be good to each other, be kind to each other, love each other. We'll see you in the next episode.
Don't stop, I can't stop. The grind is all I know. I'm focused, I can't stop. The hustle's all I know. I'm hungry, ambitious. My heart is on go. You in the presence of greatness. That's all you need to know.